Some tools are built to make it easier for us to learn, to grow, to accomplish things. But there's a question that often arises when it comes to many of our favourite digital apps and platforms. Are they really there for us to use them? Or is there deeper purpose for them to use us? It seems that everywhere we turn, companies, brands and influencers are looking to attract and to hook us into their particular ecosystem. Tonight's the night, and it's going to happen again and again. Has to happen. I can feel it. The chime, the green glow. Some call it a chain. They call it a streak. And tonight, I cut it. On purpose. I often think about solid rocket boosters. I think most people do. Not because I know anything about them, other than the fact that they're a nice metaphor for how things are useful until they are no longer useful. They have a very important but limited purpose, integral to the mission of, for example, getting a space shuttle above the Earth and up to an orbiting height. But just as importantly as them getting the shuttle up there is the fact that they need to be jettisoned once their job is done. And this is how I think about the tools and the programs and the teachers that we engage with in life. And it's the same for me as a professional coach. I remember when I first qualified in 2020, I pledged to treat my role as a solid rocket booster, something to give people the support they need to get to where they have chosen and want to go. And to partner with them to define success on their terms and to recognise when my presence is no longer necessary for them or no longer serving the purpose of the central project that we're working on. I believe that it's important for us to feel confident that the teachers, the tools, the programs, the coaches, the therapists, whoever it is, have interests other than making money and making as much money from us as they possibly can at the heart of their purpose. But we don't need to look very far to see countless examples where this trust gets broken all the time, and actors are driven by the desire to hook us into infinite loops and endless funnels that produce and feed off our growing dependence on them. And rather than recognizing themselves as rocket boosters to be jettisoned once they're no longer useful, those who create and market products and services are often trained to prioritize a simple mission: keep the customer hooked. And we see this in many of the apps that we use, don't we? The programs we participate in, the teachers that we follow. It's very difficult to see where the finish line is at times. There's always something extra. There's the upsell, there's another tier, another level to unlock. And it's especially prevalent in areas where completeness doesn't and can't exist. But rather than declaring and defining the boundaries of their own usefulness and telling us, actually, do you know what? Like, I can help you to this point, but then there's the time to jettison me if you want to continue on your journey and grow further beyond this moment. They cling on. They attempt to distract us with new shiny things to look at, or a sense of deep investment that feels too important to lose. This is something you notice on a lot of gamified apps. You might arrive at this place with an intrinsically meaningful intention, maybe to learn a language or to exercise more regularly or to meet new people. And as that habit builds of engaging with the app, you're rewarded with a streak badge and other forms of recognition for the fact that you're making some progress here. But subtly, this can shift away from being a sign of growth to being a looming guillotine of punishment. As we invest more time and effort and care into maintaining that streak, with that particular platform, the fear of losing that streak becomes a driving force, regardless of how effective the platform is at helping us do the thing that we were originally set out to do, the reason that we came there in the first place. And in a sense, that reward becomes a punishment because it is the threat of what we will lose if we jettison the app and move on to something more appropriate for us. You may recognize that as Duolingo, which I somehow found myself using earlier this year. I can tell you precisely how long ago. It was 76 days. It was the day after I returned from a trip to Finland. And I wanted to just sort of keep listening to and learning some basic Finnish as I got home. And I thought, yeah, I'll try Duolingo. I know a lot of people who've used it, and they say, it's quite good for sort of building some basic vocabulary and just keep practicing being exposed to the language. When I first downloaded the app, I was just using the free version, which provided a few minutes a day, which was plenty. But then after what was really relentless badgering, which was really annoying, I gave in to the offer of a 7-day free trial of the premium version. I thought, okay, yeah, I'll try this out. And it was, nice to not be smashed around the head with ads. And then one day I got a notification, £68.99 has been taken from your account. And I'd forgotten to cancel the trial. I'm normally so good at that. But it was too late. I was kind of looking into it. The Apple App Store wouldn't let me get a refund and just stop the use of the premium version. Ouch, painful lesson. That was me on Duolingo for the next 12 months. It was around this same time I saw news of Duolingo publicly declaring itself as an AI first company, which struck me as kind of strangely appropriate. But in general, that's not what I want to focus on here. But it's been a fascinating few months, and I've really noticed a bunch of things that I want to talk about. Specifically, how apps like Duolingo and other platforms built on the hook model change how we relate to ourselves, to our pursuits, and even to our relationship with meaning in life more generally. And to unpack this, I want to bring in 3 books. So there's Hooked by Nir Eyal, Punished by Rewards by Alfie Kohn, and The Burnout Society by Byung-Chul. So in the wake of the AI first announcement, I've seen lots of people deleting Duolingo and a lot of users sort of falling off and switching to other language learning apps instead. But I wonder if this is sometimes a case of breaking up with the container, not the form. The psychological architecture, the streaks, the badges, the rewards, all these things that are like literally rewiring our brains and not necessarily in a particularly good way. So these 3 books offer a lens on how behavioral psychology in a capitalist context is being used to extract our attention, our energy, our time, and even our capacity for acts of altruism, kindness, compassion. We're not just getting hooked, we're being manipulated and used as tools of wealth extraction for the tech industry. Our time, energy, and relationships fed back into a system that grows more powerful by exploiting what makes us human to make us act less human. Hooked, How to Build Habit-Forming Products and Brands by Nir Eyal was originally published at the end of 2013, and it introduces the hook model. This has been taught to and adopted by countless companies all over the world to essentially insert products and brands into the daily habits and emotional patterns of their users. It's one of a number of highly influential books from the past decade or so, focusing on habit formation as a key to long-term behavioral change. And we see the legacy of this one at work in many of the devices and platforms and brands that we engage with every day. So the hook model is a 4-step cycle. It starts with a trigger, which is what prompts a user to take action. And there are external triggers, so cues from the environment around us. Might be notifications, adverts, carrot and stick emails, and even subtle mirroring actions. Have you ever mindlessly picked up your phone because you saw somebody else do it? These are kind of external triggers. Then there's internal triggers, which come from within us, within the user. So emotions might be guilt or fear of failure or fear of missing out. Then there's routines, doing something when you wake up or when you sit on the toilet or before going to bed. And then there are thoughts, I can't let them beat me. I've got to do this. I need to appease the app and shut it up so it leaves me alone today. Or I don't want to upset them, so I'm going to do it. And generally, the products that are most successful in forming habits ultimately rely more on these sorts of internal triggers because they're sort of implicitly meaningful to us. And it's been interesting to notice that shift within me as my engagement with Duolingo has continued and evolved over the past 76 days. When I started, I was really drawn to what I was learning, and I was excited about what the app might enable me to do outside of it, beyond it. But over time, I have noticed that it's become more about feeding the app with my time and presence. And that draw of learning has actually become secondary. The second step in the hook cycle is action. So the action is basically the simplest behavior done in anticipation of a reward. It's about doing something in response to the trigger. The easier and more frictionless the action, the more likely it is that you're going to do it. Again, seeing how my engagement with Duolingo changed over that time. When I first started, I didn't know that you could basically get most of the answers during a lesson by clicking on the words in the question, or when it says like translate this sentence. Actually, if you click on the words, it gives you the translation. And more recently, I noticed myself doing that just so I could rush through a lesson, get it over with, maintain my streak. But I'd stopped learning. It didn't help me learn. The thing that helped me learn originally was getting it wrong and doing so over and over, so that I was challenged to really engage properly and to integrate the words and patterns in my understanding and my memory. But that green screen, that delightful sound that tells you you got the answer correct, is much more appealing than the red cross and that sort of duh, duh sound or whatever it is, which breaks the 5 in a row, the 10 in a row, the perfect score that contributes to points and just makes you feel good. So that was a big indicator to me that, while this is obviously a great way to encourage engagement with the app, it keeps you there. It's not actually the best way to learn something with any long-term depth. And the next part of the hook model is the variable reward. So unlike fixed rewards, where you do something knowing that you're going to get something specific as a result, variable rewards keep users engaged due to the sort of unpredictability. And so this is the uncertainty of what will come that catalyzes action. You see this on social media as well, where notifications can feel quite random at times. You log in and you see the notification bell light up. It's like, ooh, there's something going on there. But it's full of crap. That's what I find on LinkedIn, because I'm not a big user of LinkedIn, I think. Whenever I log in, there are notifications and it's all just rubbish. And I wonder if this is, employing this kind of variable reward tactic. Only I can't remember the last time there was actually anything that felt like a reward in my notifications on there. But yeah, Eyal talks about different types of rewards. So there's rewards of the tribe. So social validation, belonging, approval, praise from a friend, on Duolingo. I don't know if Lauren, who is apparently a friend of mine, became a friend of mine, gave me some encouragement. I don't know if she's a bot. I imagine she is. Vlad as well, who's some kind of streak buddy or something. I think that means like we keep each other going rather than we sort of take to a football field and get naked and run across it. He congratulates me on when I do things. And so that feels like some kind of reward of being seen. But yeah, it's the same, like social media algorithms also mean that you don't know who or how many people are going to see or engage with a post if you post something on social media. So you're kind of drawn back to check. And you never know who's going to pop up on there. Then there's rewards of the hunt. So material resources, information, opening a daily chest to see what's inside. Rewards that pop up seemingly randomly if you kind of click through to this page or you end up over here. And it's like, oh, there's something there waiting for me. And then there's rewards of the self. So the sense of mastery or accomplishment that comes from building the streaks, completing units, seeing proof of progress with badges, like building up a list of badges. You get this. Things like fitness apps often do this as you go certain distances over time or engage on a certain number of days or whatever. And so this kind of gives proof of progress within the ecosystem of the app even though there's often no actual real life application of these things. But once we're hooked within that ecosystem, they feel incredibly valuable and meaningful. And then finally, the fourth part of the hook model is the investment. So this is where the user puts something into the product. It might be time or data, social capital, money. This kind of investment increases our commitment to the platform and ultimately making it more difficult to leave, even if we want to. And so the Duolingo streak represents investment and time. It moves from being a reward, an acknowledgement of progress, to becoming an investment, and therefore something that will cost us if we choose to abandon it. All of that time that we've invested is suddenly meaningless and worthless and wasted. Placing part of ourselves in this thing, again, makes it difficult to untether ourselves from it. The question for me here is, what is the purpose of the hook model here? Who is it for? If we take the premise in good faith, these platforms profess to help us form desirable habits that are going to take us in the direction of things that are important to us. I want to learn a language. Duolingo is there to help me build a habit where I'm going to be learning for 5 minutes every day. And that's a habit that I will instill and can take forward with me through life. Hard to argue with that. But if we read between the lines and zoom out to view the bigger picture, this isn't how to build products and brands that help people form meaningful habits. It's how to build habit-forming products and brands. In other words, how to hook people into engaging habitually, aka compulsively, with your product or brand. There was a statistic that suggested only 0.01% of Duolingo users finish a full course, which is kind of crazy when you think about it. Doesn't reflect well on a platform designed around language learning courses. So, no one finishes them. But that's because it's not about finishing anything. In fact, it's in their interest to keep that percentage as low as possible while maintaining a high level of engagement. And this is why I found myself, 2 weeks into being on the app, I had 2 new courses on my profile. They'd been sort of thrust upon my screen. I was like, oh yeah, okay, sure, I'll learn chess. I'll learn music theory. I was like, wait a second, that's not why I'm here. And so, yeah, that's all part of keeping you engaged within the ecosystem. Many of these apps and platforms, build on a positive intention, or they set out this positive vision, helping people learn, helping people connect or create something. But it's easy to see how quickly that can shift to helping people become subscribed, attached, and hooked to the ecosystem rather than to that purpose, that original intention that we have. When platforms focus on forming habits within themselves rather than serving as a rocket booster that supports users in developing habits that flourish beyond that environment, they subtly train us to associate progress with their specific feedback loops, their streaks, their badges, their sounds, their notifications. And we start believing that actually we need these particular external nudges to do things that we once wanted to do for their own sake. And over time, that desire to learn a language morphs into the desire to maintain a streak. The app becomes less a bridge to intrinsic motivation and growth and more a tether to this particular platform, which I suppose brings us to a deeper issue, not just how these hooks are built, but what they do to our sense of motivation, to our sense of intrinsic meaning and agency. This is what Alfie Kohn first warned about nearly 30 years ago in his book Punished by Rewards. He shows how external motivators, so like grades, bonuses, stickers, even praise, don't just shape behaviour, they actually hollow it out. So the more that we dangle carrots in front of people for things like learning and creating and caring, the more we turn those things into transactions. And so over time, we start expecting rewards just for being human, these things, helping someone, only if it's watched and rewarded in some way, boosts my brand perhaps. Reading a book, yeah, sure, I'll read a book if there's a pizza coupon on the table. This was one of the case studies that Alfie Kohn talks about, where Pizza Hut had a Book It campaign which offered children free pizza, essentially for reading books, which, sounds great, sounds like a lovely incentive. But actually, as they researched it, they found that these kinds of models of incentivizing the behavior that we want to see happen in other people actually makes them less interested in reading for fun. And this is something called the over-justification effect, where the reward overshadows the reason. It turns intrinsic motivation into this kind of bargain. And once we start asking, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that, but what do I get for it? It becomes much harder to remember why we ever might have been connected to doing it in the first place. And Kohn warns about this as one of those kind of, once the toothpaste is out of the tube kind of things, it's almost impossible to get it back in. And he shows how rewards narrow our thinking. They stunt our creativity. They reduce our motivation to solve problems. In the workplace, bonuses make people more cautious and less inventive. Rewards might get that short-term compliance. It might look like things are going well, but once you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, they actually often undermine long-term motivation, sustainability, and well-being. In the Burnout Society, philosopher Byung-Chul suggests we've shifted from a disciplinary society to an achievement society. And so in a disciplinary society, we perceive power as something that exists and makes demands from outside of us. Obedience is directed towards institutions and authorities, the teacher, the manager, the priest, the parent, and so on. But in the achievement society, the voice has moved inside of us. There is no grand overseer. There's no clear line between work and rest. Now the pressure comes from within. It's a you can, I can, and so it's my fault if I don't. It's those kinds of messages. We no longer need to be compelled from the outside or forced. We want to be better. We have to be better. We choose to optimize. We hustle, not because we're being punished if we don't, but because we've learned to see ourselves as projects that must always be improving. Productivity has become morality. Any pause, any imperfection, any unmonetized hobby feels like some kind of failure. And when we can't keep up, we don't rebel, we blame ourselves. We beat ourselves up. We internalize this message that we are somehow not good enough to keep up with everybody else. And so I kind of see the employment of the hook model into so many areas of life now as a part of this. And so the problem isn't that these platforms are useless. It's that they take those good intentions, that desire to learn, to grow, to connect, and they create something maladaptive from that. This achievement society keeps us perpetually tethered to the rocket boosters. Our tools, our resources, our apps, our teachers kind of just keep us circling in this kind of looping, foggy spiral, ungrounded, but by all accounts free. So what actually supports meaningful, sustainable change over time? According to decades of research, it isn't necessarily rewards or punishments. It's autonomy, the freedom to choose. It's competence, the feeling that we're growing, that we're developing in real and experienced ways, and connection, that sense that what we're doing matters beyond ourselves. We stick with things when they're rooted in something meaningful, when they belong to us, when it feels like we have chosen them, when they reflect the rhythm of life that we actually want to live. But how do we honour our capacity for growth without surrendering to the cult of perpetual, never-ending improvement and optimization? How do we allow ourselves to rest, to play, to explore, without having to justify it through productivity, performance, or profit? How do we learn for learning's sake? How do we create for creativity's sake? How do we be for being's sake? Can we engage with life without necessarily always having to tie it to something useful? I don't have an answer to this question. And maybe that's the point. Just because something works, it doesn't mean it's good for us. And this is something I think we need to constantly remind ourselves of. The hook model might be effective, and it is effective, but at what cost? And what is it effective at? It taps into our behavioral instincts, of course, but does it reflect who we really are, who we want to be, how we want to be as a society? Or does it speak to who we've trained to become in a system that thrives on separation, extraction, alienation, and urgency? I guess if nothing else, we can just begin by noticing, where is it that we are hooked? What are those things that are trying to hook us? What is the nature of that hooking? And we can name those things. We can chuckle at them, and we can maybe unhook ourselves together. Let the streak die. Let the rocket boosters fall. If you're up for that.